11,000 years ago, on a sun-scorched hilltop in southern Turkey, something rose from the earth that had no business existing. Massive limestone pillars, some weighing up to 10 tons, carved with extraordinary precision and arranged in vast ceremonial circles. No metal tools, no writing, no farming civilization behind them. Nothing that our understanding of history said should have been there yet. This was Göbekli Tepe. And when archaeologists first uncovered it, they didn't just update their textbooks. They threw them out entirely. For decades, the question of who actually built this place sparked fierce debate, wild theories, and genuine scientific controversy. Then ancient DNA entered the picture, and what it revealed about the people behind those stones, their origins, their biology, their place in the full sweep of human history, turned out to be more extraordinary than anything the myths had ever imagined. To understand why Göbekli Tepe matters, you first need to stand inside it, at least in your imagination. Picture a hilltop in southeastern Turkey, not far from the Syrian border, dry rolling plains stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Now picture enormous T-shaped pillars of limestone rising from the earth, some nearly 6 meters tall, each one weighing several tons, arranged in sweeping circular enclosures with 2 even larger pillars standing at the center of each ring like silent guardians. These aren't rough, desperate scratchings in stone. They are works of deliberate, practiced artistry. Foxes, vultures, scorpions, wild boar, snakes, and gazelles carved across the surfaces with a skill and patience that still impresses professional sculptors today. Many of the pillars appear to have arms and hands. Some wear what look like sculpted loincloths. The dig team believes they were intended to represent human figures, enormous, faceless men frozen in stone, presiding over something we still don't fully understand. Now consider the timeline, because this is where things get genuinely difficult to absorb. Stonehenge was built around 5,000 years ago, the Great Pyramids of Giza roughly 4,500 years ago. Both are rightly considered among the most astonishing achievements in human history. Göbekli Tepe predates them both by thousands of years. Its oldest layers date back approximately 11,000 years, meaning that by the time the Egyptians were laying the first stones of the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe was already ancient. Think about everything humanity has managed to fit into the last 4,500 years. Ancient Greece, the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the nuclear bomb, the internet. Now triple that span of time and place yourself at the beginning of it. That is how far back those pillars reach. And here is the part that broke archaeology open. At the time those stones were being raised, none of the things we associate with monumental construction existed yet. No domesticated crops, no pottery, no metal tools, no wheeled transport, no writing, no empire, no state. By every conventional marker of what we call civilization, the people responsible for Göbekli Tepe weren't supposed to be capable of building Göbekli Tepe. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating the site in earnest during the 1990s, he recognized almost immediately that he was looking at something that rewrote the rules. Below mere centimeters of accumulated soil were the tops of the great standing pillars. As his team dug deeper, full rings of carved stone emerged, then another ring, then another. A geomagnetic survey in 2003 would eventually reveal at least 20 separate buried enclosures spread across the hill. Schmidt devoted the rest of his professional life to this single site in southeastern Turkey, and it consumed him completely. His most provocative conclusion was also his most enduring. The temple, he argued, came before the farm. Organized religion, communal ritual, monumental construction, these didn't emerge from agricultural surplus as everyone had assumed. They came first. The impulse to build something sacred may have been the force that drove people toward farming in the first place. That idea sent shockwaves through archaeology, and the story was only just beginning. When something this old and this impressive turns up in the archaeological record, imagination tends to arrive before science does. And imagination, it turns out, is remarkably creative, when confronted with something it cannot easily explain. The theories began almost as soon as Göbekli Tepe became publicly known. For some, the sheer scale of the site was proof enough that ordinary ancient humans couldn't have been responsible. Something else must have been involved. Something greater. And from that single assumption, an entire ecosystem of alternative explanations bloomed. There were those who pointed to the Anunnaki, the gods of ancient Sumerian mythology, recast by certain popular authors as extraterrestrial visitors who seeded early human civilization with knowledge and technology far beyond what Stone Age people could have developed alone. Others connected the site to the Watchers described in the Book of Enoch, a fallen order of celestial beings who, according to the text, taught humanity forbidden arts. One author went so far as to link Göbekli Tepe directly to the Garden of Eden, which is a creative leap given that Genesis says nothing whatsoever about Adam and Eve organizing a large-scale limestone quarrying operation. Then there is the lost civilization theory, perhaps the most persistent and seductive of all. Writers like Graham Hancock have argued that an advanced pre-Holocene civilization, sophisticated, technologically capable, and now completely vanished, was responsible for sites like Göbekli Tepe. According to this view, a catastrophic cometary impact around 13,000 years ago triggered a climate event that wiped this civilization from the face of the earth, leaving only its monuments as ghostly evidence of its existence. It is a compelling narrative. It is also, when you examine the evidence carefully, a narrative in search of facts rather than the other way around. Two researchers even claim that one of Göbekli Tepe's pillars functions as an astronomical chart recording the precise date of that cosmic disaster. This reading requires the builders to have mapped the same constellations the ancient Greeks would develop 9,000 years later, which is, to put it generously, an extraordinary stretch. Similarly, theories about the site's astronomical alignments and its possible connection to the rising of Sirius are genuinely interesting as hypotheses, but remain firmly in the territory of educated speculation rather than established archaeology. What all of these theories share, beneath their surface differences, is a single, unspoken assumption that the people of the ancient Near East, the actual human beings who lived, worked, and died in this region 11,000 years ago, were simply not capable, not intelligent enough, not organized enough, not sophisticated enough to have done this themselves. That assumption has deep roots in 19th century thinking about cultural evolution, in the idea that prehistory meant primitiveness, that people without writing or metal were essentially closer to animals than to us. It is a deeply condescending view, and it is wrong. Every fringe theory about Göbekli Tepe, no matter how elaborately constructed, ultimately rests on this same crumbling foundation. But the archaeological record, examined honestly and in full, tells a completely different story. And when ancient DNA was finally added to that record, it didn't reveal a hidden civilization lurking in the gene pool. It revealed something the conspiracy theories had never considered. Before DNA entered the picture, the ground itself had already started pushing back against the simplest explanations. And what it was saying was considerably more interesting than either the fringe theorists or the original archaeological consensus had accounted for. Klaus Schmidt's hunter-gatherer theory always had a problem. It relied on a particular image of the people at Göbekli Tepe as seasonal visitors, nomadic groups passing through, congregating for ritual purposes, and then dispersing back into the landscape. It was a compelling picture, it just didn't quite match what the soil was actually full of. Among the most common tools found throughout the site's sediment layers are sickle blades. Not dozens of them, tens of thousands. Sickle blades are the signature tool of cereal harvesting, shaped and used specifically for cutting crop stalks close to the ground. Their presence at this scale is not incidental, it is diagnostic. These are not the tools of people occasionally supplementing a hunting diet with a handful of wild seeds. These are the tools of people engaged seriously, repeatedly, and systematically with grain. Alongside the sickle blades are mortars, pestles, and grinding slabs, the processing equipment of people working with plant material at volume. Researcher Laura Dietrich conducted detailed analysis of these tools and confirmed that many showed evidence of use specifically on plants from the family that includes barley and wheat. The picture building from the artifact record was not one of nomadic ritual visitors. It was one of people with a sustained working relationship with the land around them. The animal bones tell a parallel story. Tens of thousands of butchered remains fill the site's deposits, predominantly gazelles and wild cattle, but also significant numbers of wild sheep showing early signs of the kind of managed interaction that eventually leads to full domestication. Great feasts almost certainly took place here, possibly ritual ones, on a scale that would have required serious logistical organization to sustain. The architecture adds yet another layer of complexity. The large circular enclosures were almost certainly roofed rather than open air, making their interiors dark, enclosed, and deliberately atmospheric spaces. Smaller structures within the broader complex bear a striking resemblance to permanent dwellings, the kind built by people who intended to stay rather than pass through. More recent excavations have since uncovered morphologically domesticated cereal grains at the site itself, strengthening the case considerably. And then there is the construction timeline, which tells its own strange story. Over roughly 1,800 years of building activity, the quality of the work actually declined. The oldest enclosures contain the most impressive, most technically accomplished stonework. As the centuries pass, the craftsmanship gets progressively less refined until the later structures look almost rudimentary by comparison. 20 or more separate buried enclosures, each built over or around the last, revealed by a geomagnetic survey in 2003, speak to a community that returned to this place generation after generation. The picture that emerges from all of this is not of hunter-gatherers pausing between migrations. It is of a community deeply embedded in a landscape, working it, managing it, and standing at the threshold of one of the most consequential transitions in all of human history. The shift from following food to growing it. Archaeology had established this much, but DNA was about to show just how deep that story truly ran. For most of human history, the dead kept their secrets. Whatever stories they carried, where they came from, who their ancestors were, how far they had traveled, all of it disappeared with them into the earth. Then, in the last 2 decades, ancient DNA changed that completely. Scientists learned to extract and sequence genetic material from bones thousands of years old, from teeth and inner ear structures where biological material survives longest. Suddenly, the past began to speak in an entirely new language. Not the language of objects and soil layers and tool types, but the language of biology itself. And what that language revealed about the people of Göbekli Tepe and the broader region of the ancient Near East was extraordinary. Genetic studies of human remains from across Anatolia, the Levant, and the Zagros Mountains, the arc of land that cradles the Fertile Crescent, revealed something that nobody had quite anticipated. These populations, living in close geographic proximity, were genetically quite distinct from one another. The Anatolian farmers, the group most directly connected to the Göbekli Tepe region, carried a specific ancestral signature unlike their neighbors to the east and south. These were not a single interchangeable mass of prehistoric people moving uniformly across a landscape. They were distinct communities with deep, separate histories, developing largely in parallel across the same broad region over thousands of years. This matters enormously for the lost civilization argument. If some advanced founding population had swept through this region, teaching its inhabitants to quarry stone and organize labor and carve animals with practiced hands, we would expect to find their genetic fingerprint embedded in the DNA of the people who came after. We would expect a signal, some anomalous ancestry, some inexplicable genetic contribution from a population that didn't belong. There is none. The DNA shows no hidden founders, no ghost population, no mysterious influx of outside ancestry, coinciding with the rise of Göbekli Tepe. The builders were the descendants of people who had lived in this region for thousands of years before the first pillar was ever raised. The continuity is unbroken and unambiguous. Whatever knowledge went into those carved stones, it didn't arrive from outside. It grew here, accumulated here, passed from generation to generation by people whose bones were already in this ground, long before the first enclosure took shape. The DNA also confirms the complicated economic picture that the archaeology had already suggested. Genetic patterns across the region align with populations in the process of transitioning toward agriculture, not sudden farmers, not pure foragers, but communities moving through exactly the kind of gradual, generationally slow shift that the sickle blades and grinding stones and managed animal bones had already implied. The genes in the ground tell the same story the tools in the ground told. They just tell it with considerably more precision. And then there is what the genetics reveal about what came next. Because the story of these people did not end on that hilltop in southeastern Turkey. It did not end when the last enclosure was buried and the builders walked away. It traveled, it spread. It became, in ways that are only now becoming fully visible, the story of a significant portion of humanity alive today. But that part of the story deserves its own moment. The Anatolian farmer lineage did not stay put. That is perhaps the most quietly astonishing thing the DNA revealed, not just who these people were, but where they went and what they carried with them when they left. As agriculture spread westward across the following millennia, the people of this region moved with it, not as a single dramatic migration, but as a slow generational expansion, communities pushing gradually into new territory, bringing their seeds, their animals, their accumulated knowledge, and their genes. By the time this movement had run its course, the Anatolian farmer lineage had become one of the primary ancestral sources for the population of Europe. Modern Europeans carry a substantial portion of their genetic heritage from exactly this source. The people who gathered at Göbekli Tepe, who harvested wild barley and managed wild sheep and raised towering limestone pillars without the wheel or metal, are among the ancestors of much of the world today. Sit with that for a moment. The builders of those carved enclosures are not a footnote in human history. They are not a mysterious, vanished people sealed off from us by the distance of 11,000 years. In the most literal biological sense, for a significant portion of humanity alive right now, they are family. When you look at those pillars, the foxes and vultures and scorpions rendered in limestone with patient and practiced hands, you are not necessarily looking at the work of strangers. You may be looking at something made by people whose genes flow through you directly. The distance of 11,000 years collapses into something far more immediate when you frame it that way. And it makes the question of what drove these people to build something so extraordinary feel considerably more personal. The DNA also lends unexpected weight to the idea that haunted Klaus Schmidt for his entire career. His most provocative claim, the one that sent shockwaves through archaeology, was that the temple preceded the farm, that the organizational and spiritual impulse behind Göbekli Tepe came before the agricultural revolution rather than after it. The genetic evidence, read alongside the archaeology, suggests he was right. The populations of this region were already socially complex, already coordinating large communal projects, already building permanent settlements and managing wild animals and harvesting cereals before domestication was fully established. The social infrastructure came first. The farming followed. This inverts the story we have long told ourselves about how civilization develops. The standard model runs in one direction. Surplus food enables leisure, leisure enables thought, thought enables religion and art and monument building. Göbekli Tepe, and now the DNA that speaks for its builders, suggests the opposite sequence is equally possible. That the hunger to build something sacred, something shared, something larger than any single life, may itself be a driver of civilization rather than its product. Klaus Schmidt died of a heart attack in July 2014, never seeing the full weight of genetic confirmation fall behind the theory he had spent decades defending. There is something genuinely affecting about that. The man who gave his professional life to a hilltop in southeastern Turkey was right about the most important thing. He just didn't live quite long enough to watch the science prove it. Let's put the lost civilization argument to rest properly, because it deserves more than a dismissive wave. It deserves to be dismantled with the actual evidence of what late Pleistocene and early Holocene people were genuinely capable of. And that evidence is, frankly, stunning. Start with tools. The people of this era were not bashing rocks together and hoping for the best. They were manufacturing complex, multi-component implements from stone, bone, antler, and wood, combining different materials with a level of technical understanding that required sophisticated, accumulated knowledge to develop and transmit across generations. These were not simple objects. They were engineered solutions to specific problems, refined over centuries of experimentation. Then consider hunting. These were people who regularly brought down animals far larger and more dangerous than themselves. Bison, aurochs, woolly mammoths, creatures that could kill a human being without particularly trying. Hunting them successfully didn't just require courage. It required careful planning, coordinated group strategy, detailed knowledge of animal behavior, and the kind of clear, complex communication that only a fully modern human mind is capable of producing. You do not take down a mammoth by accident. Then there is navigation. This is the one that tends to stop people cold when they hear it properly. The Mesolithic people who occupied Fringe cave in Greece were regularly harvesting deep-water tuna and sourcing obsidian from the island of Melos. Both of those things required sailing well out into the open Mediterranean, out of sight of land, in watercraft capable of handling open ocean conditions. These were not people paddling cautiously along coastlines. And then there are the first humans to reach Australia and New Guinea more than 40,000 years ago, who crossed open water stretches exceeding 90 kilometers to do so. 90 kilometers of open ocean, 40,000 years before Göbekli Tepe's first stone was raised. These were not people who needed outside help to accomplish remarkable things. These were problem solvers of the highest order, operating without any of the institutional scaffolding we associate with sophistication and consistently achieving things that still impress us today. The engineering of Göbekli Tepe, remarkable as it genuinely is, sits well within this tradition. Ethnographic parallels from around the world demonstrate precisely how communities without modern technology move and raise massive stones. The Nias Islanders of Sumatra regularly shifted stone blocks comparable in size to Göbekli Tepe's largest pillars using nothing more than coordinated community labor. On Easter Island, research eventually showed that small teams could move the famous moai across the landscape in an upright position using ropes alone, effectively walking the statues forward. Elegant, simple, requiring no lost civilization to explain it, just knowledge and coordination. Detailed estimates for Göbekli Tepe's pillars confirm that the labor required, even accounting for uphill movement and rough terrain, was entirely achievable for a settled community of a few hundred people with sufficient planning and sustained communal effort. There was no miracle of engineering here. There was accumulated knowledge, social organization, and determined human effort. And the DNA confirms what all of this evidence already implied. Fully modern humans. The same cognitive capacity, the same brain, the same capacity for imagination and planning and greatness that exists in every person alive today. It was always there. It never needed to be given from outside. Göbekli Tepe is often described as the world's oldest temple. But that framing, compelling as it is, undersells what this place actually represents. It is not just a monument, it is a threshold, the moment preserved in stone where something fundamental shifted in the human story. The DNA didn't reveal gods or aliens or a vanished master race standing behind those pillars. It revealed people. Specific, traceable, entirely human people, whose story didn't end on that hilltop, but traveled westward across millennia, flowing into the ancestry of much of the world alive today. With only a fraction of the site excavated, Göbekli Tepe is almost certainly not finished rewriting history. Whatever is still buried beneath that limestone hill, it was put there by people who needed no outside hand to achieve something extraordinary. They looked at a hilltop and imagined something no one had ever built. Then they built it.